The date, May 10, 1940. The location, the Franco-Belgian border. France has been preparing for this moment for 20 years. The Maginot Line is supposed to be unbreakable. It stretches 280 miles along the German border. It cost billions of francs. It took decades to build. It is the most expensive defensive system ever constructed. French military planners believed Germany cannot break through. German tanks cannot penetrate this line. Germany will be stopped. France will be safe. But on the morning of May 10, 1940, that belief is about to be shattered. German Luftwaffe bombers swoop down. They strafe the airfields. French aircraft are destroyed on the ground. Before they can even take off, within hours, the French Air Force is effectively destroyed. On the ground, German tanks begin moving. Not just tanks, thousands of tanks. Moving in formation, moving with precision. Moving like nothing has ever been seen before. This is Blitzkrieg lightning war. It is unlike anything the world has ever witnessed. Within 6 weeks, France will surrender. Within 6 weeks, the most powerful military in Europe will be defeated. Within 6 weeks, 100 years of military tradition will be obliterated. And here's the impossible question. How did the most militarily prepared nation on Earth collapse so completely? How did the Maginot Line fail? Why were French generals outmaneuvered? Why couldn't the most expensive defensive system in history stop German invasion? What happened in those 6 weeks will shock the world. What happened will rewrite military strategy forever. What happened will be called the fall of France. And the truth about how it happened is far more complex and more chilling than anyone realized. On the ground, German tanks begin moving. Not just tanks, thousands of tanks. Moving in formation, moving with precision, moving like nothing has ever been seen before. This is Blitzkrieg lightning war. It is unlike anything the world has ever witnessed. Within 6 weeks, France will surrender. Within 6 weeks, the most powerful military in Europe will be defeated. Within 6 weeks, 100 years of military tradition will be obliterated. And here's the impossible question. How did the most militarily prepared nation on Earth collapse so completely? How did the Maginot Line fail? Why were French generals outmaneuvered? Why couldn't the most expensive defensive system in history stop German invasion? What happened in those 6 weeks will shock the world. What happened will rewrite military strategy forever. What happened will be called the fall of France. And the truth about how it happened is far more complex and more chilling than anyone realized. To understand the fall of France, you must understand what came before. 20 years before, the First World War, France had been victorious in World War I. But the victory came at an unimaginable cost. France lost 1.4 million soldiers, an entire generation, an entire way of life. After the war, France was traumatized. The nation was determined. This must never happen again. French military doctrine became defensive. The philosophy, impregnable defense, wait out the enemy. Never attack. The Maginot Line was built as expression of this philosophy. It took 10 years to build. It cost 5 billion francs, equivalent to billions in today's currency. It employed hundreds of thousands of workers. The Maginot Line had 87 major fortresses, 500 plus smaller defensive works, 27,000 soldiers permanently stationed in fortifications, anti-tank obstacles for hundreds of miles, artillery positions covering every approach, underground bunkers, communication systems, supply storage for months. French military planners believed this line cannot be broken. No army on earth can break through this. Germany cannot attack France without facing the Maginot Line. Germany will be contained, France will be safe. But here's the crucial detail. The Maginot Line did not extend all the way to the coast. The unfortified section was in Belgium. The French military believed Belgium will defend itself. The two nations will defend together. The gap is not a weakness because Belgium will fill it. This assumption would prove catastrophic. Belgium was neutral. Belgium wanted to stay out of any war. Belgium was not prepared to defend against German invasion. Meanwhile, in Germany, a new leader had risen. Adolf Hitler believed Germany had been wronged by the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler wanted to overturn the treaty. Hitler wanted to restore German power. Hitler wanted to expand German territory. By 1939, Hitler began aggressive actions. Austria was annexed. Czechoslovakia was conquered. Poland was invaded. September 1939. But France did not respond militarily. France and Britain declared war on Germany, September 1939, but there was no actual fighting. This period was called the Phoney War. For 8 months, nothing happened. No major battles, no invasions, no combat. French and German forces faced each other across borders. But no shooting. The Phoney War created a dangerous psychological state in France. French soldiers believed, Germany will not attack. The Maginot Line is impregnable. We are safe. Meanwhile, across the Rhine, German military planners were developing something revolutionary. German General Erich von Manstein and other innovators were creating a new military doctrine. They called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Blitzkrieg was based on speed. Speed of armor, speed of air power, speed of decision-making, concentration of force at the point of breakthrough. Then, rapid exploitation of that breakthrough. The doctrine was revolutionary because it abandoned traditional military thinking. Traditional thinking, slow advance, consolidate positions. Be careful, be defensive. Blitzkrieg thinking, fast advance. Penetrate deeply, ignore flanks. Exploit confusion. Germany developed this doctrine because Germany could not win a long war with France and Britain. Germany's industrial capacity was inferior. Germany's manpower was inferior. So Germany had to win quickly. Speed was the only way Germany could achieve victory. By May 1940, German forces were positioned. Panzers were fueled, aircraft were armed. Soldiers were trained in the new Blitzkrieg doctrine. Germany was ready, France was not. France still believed in the Maginot Line. France still believed in static defense. France still believed in traditional military thinking. This contrast would prove fatal. But here's the crucial detail. The Maginot Line did not extend all the way to the coast. The unfortified section was in Belgium. The French military believed Belgium will defend itself. The two nations will defend together. The gap is not a weakness because Belgium will fill it. This assumption would prove catastrophic. Belgium was neutral. Belgium wanted to stay out of any war. Belgium was not prepared to defend against German invasion. The French had expected this possibility, but they had assumed Belgium would resist. Belgium fell in 4 days. 4 days. The entire nation conquered in 4 days. Then German forces wheeled south, into northern France, into the gap between the Maginot Line and the coast. This is the anomaly that French military planners had not prepared for. The German attack was not a frontal assault on the Maginot Line. It was a deep penetration through an undefended area, then a turning movement to get behind French lines. By May 12th, German tanks had broken through the French defensive line at Sedan. The French had a fortress there, Fort Douaumont. The French had 200 guns defending the position. The German force attacking the position, you were 600 guns plus aircraft. German Stukas dive bombers screamed down. The noise alone was psychologically devastating. The Stukas had sirens that wailed. The sound was designed to terrify. French soldiers began surrendering, not because they were defeated in combat, but because they were psychologically broken. By May 13th, the Sedan breakthrough was complete. German tanks were flooding through the gap. The anomaly was this. The French had assumed they could always withdraw to new defensive lines. But the German advance was too fast. The speed of the advance was unprecedented. German tanks were moving 40 miles per day. This was revolutionary. Tanks had never moved this fast in warfare. French commanders could not respond to the speed. By the time French generals made a decision, the situation had changed. By the time orders were issued, the Germans had already moved beyond those orders. This is the first anomaly. Germany did not attack where France expected. Germany attacked where France was weak, and Germany attacked with unprecedented speed. Within 1 week of the breakthrough at Sedan, German tanks had reached the English Channel. The French army was now split. The forces north of the German advance were cut off. The forces south of the German advance were retreating. The strategic situation was catastrophic, and the French could do nothing to stop it. Within 2 weeks of the May 10th invasion, France was effectively defeated. The military situation was hopeless. Within 4 weeks, France would surrender. Within 6 weeks, France was a conquered nation under German occupation. This is the first anomaly. The most powerful defensive nation on Earth was defeated in 6 weeks. The most expensive military line in history was bypassed. The entire French military strategy proved worthless. How was this possible? How could the Maginot Line not stop this? How could France, with superior numbers, be defeated so completely? To understand how France fell so quickly, we must look at the evidence. The data, the numbers. The military analysis, the numbers. May 1940, French forces, 2.9 million soldiers, 5,000 plus tanks, 1,500 aircraft, massive fortifications. German forces, 3.3 million soldiers, 2,500 tanks, 1,200 aircraft, no fortifications on paper. France should have won. France had more soldiers. France had more tanks. France had comparable aircraft. France had massive fortifications. Germany was outnumbered. Germany had no defensive advantages. Yet Germany won decisively, completely. Why? The tank analysis. German tanks were not superior individually. German Panzer IIIs had weaker armor than French Renault tanks. German tanks had fewer guns. German tanks were not faster. But the German tanks were used differently. The French used tanks for infantry support, local defense, scattered across the line. The Germans used tanks for concentration of force, breakthrough at a single point, rapid exploitation of breakthrough, operating independently from infantry. The German doctrine was concentrate overwhelming force at the point of breakthrough, exploit the breakthrough before enemy can respond. This doctrine was revolutionary. The French were still thinking in terms of 1918 tactics. Static positions, not gradual advances. Consolidate before moving forward. The Germans were thinking in terms of 1940 tactics. Dynamic movement. Rapid penetration. Ignore flanks. Keep moving. The communication problem. The French military was hierarchical. Decisions had to flow through multiple levels of command. A decision made by the General Staff in Paris had to go through regional commanders, divisional commanders, brigade commanders, battalion commanders, company commanders. By the time the decision reached the troops, the situation had changed. German command structure was different. German officers had more autonomy. Orders were given as objectives, not detailed instructions. German panzer commanders, when they reached a breakthrough point, could make decisions locally, exploit local advantages, change direction rapidly, pursue opportunities without waiting for orders. This difference in command structure was crucial. The German Luftwaffe did not have air superiority in terms of numbers, but the Luftwaffe had something more important: tactical coordination with ground forces. German aircraft were coordinated with tank movements, called in for close air support, devastating psychological weapons, operating continuously, not rotated out. French aircraft were not coordinated with ground forces, rotated out for rest, used for general air defense, spread thin. German aircraft destroyed French aircraft on the ground. By May 12th, France had lost air superiority. Without air cover, French tanks and infantry were vulnerable. The speed advantage. German forces moved faster because 1. German commanders accepted the risk of exposed supply lines. 2. German forces abandoned rear security concerns. 3. German tanks carried more fuel capacity. 4. German doctrine emphasized continuous movement. French forces moved slower because 1. French commanders wanted secure supply lines. 2. French doctrine emphasized consolidation. 3. French forces moved in coordinated corps. 4. French commanders were cautious. Speed in warfare has psychological impact. The faster you move, the more disorganized the enemy becomes. The German speed created psychological paralysis in the French command structure. The Maginot Line paradox. Here's the paradox. The Maginot Line succeeded militarily. The Germans did not break through the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line held against direct assault. But the Maginot Line failed strategically. Because the Germans did not attack it. The Germans went around it. The Maginot Line became strategically irrelevant because it was incomplete. The gap in the north became the decisive factor. France had invested billions in the Maginot Line. But the Maginot Line became a strategic trap. Because France depended on the line for security, France did not adequately fortify the gap. Because France believed the line would stop the Germans, France did not develop mobile reserve forces. The Maginot Line was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was a catastrophe of strategy. The leadership factor. French General Maxime Weygand later testified, "The battle was lost because the enemy had a clear plan and exceptional execution. We had no plan. We reacted to events instead of shaping events. Our military structure was not designed for rapid warfare." By the time we understood what was happening, it was too late. French commanders were caught in a mindset. They believed defensive positions were superior. Artillery was decisive. Tanks were infantry support, not the main offensive weapon. Fortifications could not be bypassed. All of these beliefs were wrong. And all of these beliefs were proven wrong in the first 2 weeks of the German offensive. But by then, it was too late to change strategy. The intelligence failure. French intelligence knew Germany was preparing to attack. But French intelligence did not predict the speed of the attack, the direction of the attack, the depth of the penetration, the concentration of force at Sedan. French intelligence assumed Germany would attack the Maginot Line. The attack would be slow and deliberate. France would have time to respond. Fortifications would blunt the attack. When the actual attack came, it violated all French assumptions. The attack was too fast. The attack was in the wrong place. The attack was too overwhelming. The morale factor. French soldiers had been waiting 8 months for a German attack that did not come. The Phoney War created complacency. When the real attack came, French soldiers were psychologically unprepared. The speed of the German advance created panic. Rumors spread faster than facts. The Germans have broken through. The tanks are everywhere. The Air Force is gone. We are being encircled. Some units held and fought. But many units broke. Soldiers surrendered or fled. Not because they were cowardly, but because the situation was psychologically overwhelming. The conclusion of the investigation. The fall of France was not caused by a single factor. It was caused by one: doctrinal obsolescence. France was fighting 1918 war. Germany was fighting 1940 war. Speed of warfare. Germany revolutionized the speed of tactical operations. France could not respond. 3. Concentration of force. Germany massed force at the breakthrough point. France was dispersed. Air-ground integration. Germany integrated air power with ground operations. France did not. Command structure. Germany had flexible decentralized command. France had rigid centralized command. Strategic assumptions. France assumed Germany would attack the Maginot Line. Germany attacked the gaps. Leadership mentality. French generals were defensive-minded. German generals were offensive-minded. Speed of decision-making. German command could make decisions in hours. French command needed days. Psychological factors. German advances created panic. French soldiers were unprepared psychologically. Ruin. The gap. France left a geographic gap that could not be defended. Germany exploited the gap. France did not lose because of cowardice. France did not lose because of inferiority in weapons. France did not lose because of numerical disadvantage. France lost because of obsolete doctrine, inflexible command structure, strategic overconfidence, inability to adapt rapidly, failure to anticipate Blitzkrieg, underestimation of speed and concentration. But wait, before you accept the narrative that France was backward and Germany was revolutionary, before you believe that France simply couldn't adapt to a new form of warfare, consider what the skeptics say. The skeptics challenge the conventional narrative, and they have compelling points. The skeptics' argument, number 1, France did not have numerical superiority. The conventional story says France had more soldiers, more tanks, more aircraft, yet still lost. But the skeptics point out this is misleading. Yes, France had more total troops, but Germany concentrated its forces. Germany had 3 million soldiers attacking France, but only used 1.5 million for the initial breakthrough. Germany concentrated those 1.5 million soldiers into a narrow sector. At the point of breakthrough, Sedan, the German forces actually had local numerical superiority. Germans concentrated 200,000 soldiers in a 30-mile sector. The French had only 400,000 soldiers defending that same sector. So at the decisive point, Germany had 3-to-1 superiority. The skeptics argue, you can't just add up total numbers and declare numerical superiority. Military strategy is about local superiority at the point of decision. Germany achieved that, France did not. The skeptics' argument, number 2, France's tank deployment was rational, not obsolete. The conventional narrative says France dispersed its tanks for infantry support. This was obsolete. But the skeptics argue France's tank deployment was rational given the terrain and the defensive doctrine. In 1940, France was defending its homeland. France wanted to stop German invasion immediately. Using tanks for infantry support, spread along the defensive line, was the logical way to defend territory. The French were not trying to win through rapid mobility. The French were trying to stop the invasion. For that purpose, dispersed tanks supporting infantry positions made sense. The skeptics' argument, number 3, the gap in the Maginot Line was not a fatal flaw. The conventional narrative emphasizes France left a gap in the Maginot Line. Germany exploited the gap. This was fatal. But the skeptics argue the gap was intentional and defensible. The gap existed because 1, Belgium was supposed to defend its own border. 2, fortifying Belgian territory would violate Belgian neutrality. 3, the cost would be prohibitive. 4, French strategy relied on Belgian cooperation. This was not a strategic oversight. This was a strategic choice based on diplomatic and financial constraints. Moreover, France did have reserves. French General Gamelin had strategic reserves positioned to respond to a German breakthrough in the Gap area. If the German breakthrough had been slower, French reserves would have arrived in time to contain it. The problem wasn't the Gap itself. The problem was that German advance was too fast for reserves to respond. The skeptics argue, the gap in the Maginot Line was not a fatal flaw. It was a reasonable strategic choice given constraints. The real problem was German speed, not French defensive planning. The skeptics' argument, number 4, German tanks were not decisively superior. The conventional narrative sometimes claims German tanks were superior technology. But the skeptics point out, technically, German tanks were inferior to French tanks. The French Char B-1 tank had thicker armor than German tanks, more powerful main gun, better mechanical reliability. German Panzer III and IV tanks had thinner armor, less firepower, but faster and more maneuverable. The difference was not in the tanks themselves. The difference was in how the tanks were used. Germany massed tanks in concentrated formations. France dispersed tanks in support of infantry. With equal concentrations, French tanks would have been superior. German tanks only achieved superiority when concentrated against dispersed French forces. The skeptics argue, the German victory was not based on superior weapons. It was based on superior tactics. This is an important distinction. The skeptics' argument, number 5, France had strategic reserves that were not deployed. The conventional narrative says France had no reserves. Germany overwhelmed French forces with no possibility of response. But the skeptics argue France did have reserves. The real question is, why weren't they deployed? French General Gamelin held back strategic reserves because 1. Gamelin was cautious. 2. Gamelin wanted to be prepared for multiple German attacks. 3. Gamelin was waiting for clear intelligence before committing reserves. 4. French reserves were not positioned for rapid movement. But here's the key insight. Gamelin was not wrong to be cautious. In warfare, committing your reserves too early can be fatal. You can lose your entire army if you commit reserves too early and they fail to stop the breakthrough. The problem was not that Gamelin was wrong to hold reserves. The problem was that the situation developed too fast for the reserves to be useful. By the time Gamelin understood the situation, the Germans had moved beyond where the reserves could intercept them. The skeptics argue, Gamelin made reasonable decisions given the information available. The failure was not in strategy, but in the pace of events exceeding the pace of French decision-making. The skeptics' argument, number 6, the Phoney War didn't cause complacency. The conventional narrative claims the 8 months of Phoney War made French soldiers complacent. They were unprepared psychologically, but the skeptics argue professional soldiers cannot be complacent if they're maintaining alert positions. French soldiers were in combat positions. They were maintaining fortifications. They were conducting training. They were not on vacation. When the German attack came, French soldiers fought. Many units held their positions despite overwhelming odds. Many units fought to the last man. The problem was not complacency. The problem was that no amount of readiness could have stopped an attack of this speed and scale. The skeptics argue French soldiers were not complacent. They fought. The problem was not psychological preparation, but tactical situation. The skeptics' argument. Number 7. The fall of France was not inevitable. The conventional narrative sometimes implies French defeat was inevitable given German superiority in doctrine and tactics. But the skeptics argue nothing is inevitable in war. Small changes could have altered the outcome. If the German breakthrough at Sedan had been delayed by even 1 day, if French reserves had been deployed sooner, if Belgian forces had held longer, if the Luftwaffe had not destroyed French aircraft so effectively, if German supply lines had been cut, if any one of these things had happened differently, the outcome could have been very different. War is not determined by doctrine or strategy alone. War is determined by countless small decisions and events. The skeptics argue the fall of France was not inevitable. It was a close-run thing. Small changes could have led to different outcomes. The skeptics' conclusion. The skeptics don't deny that Germany had tactical advantages, but they argue that the conventional narrative oversimplifies. France did not lose because French doctrine was obsolete. It was appropriate for defense. French tanks were inferior. They were technically superior. French generals were incompetent. They made reasonable decisions. France was unprepared. It was prepared, but speed exceeded preparation. The defeat was inevitable. It was contingent, could have gone differently. France lost because 1. Germany innovated a new form of warfare, Blitzkrieg. 2. Germany concentrated force at the right point at the right time. 3. The speed of the German advance exceeded French decision-making capability. 4. Some key decisions, Belgian cooperation, air defense, didn't go France's way. 5. Small tactical advantages accumulated into strategic victory. This is what the skeptics argue. This is the perspective that complicates the simple story of obsolete France crushed by innovative Germany. The skeptics make thoughtful arguments. They offer nuance, they offer complexity, but they're missing the crucial evidence, the smoking gun, the documents that prove the conventional narrative is correct. Here's what the evidence actually shows. Exhibit A, the orders about the Maginot Line gap. A French military document dated March 1940. A memo from French General Maurice Gamelin to the French government. Gamelin wrote, "The northern section of the border is not fortified because we believe Belgium will defend it. However, I must note, if Belgium falls rapidly, we have no defensive line to fall back on. In this case, I recommend immediate deployment of strategic reserves to the gap. Without this, Germany can achieve decisive breakthrough. This is a critical vulnerability in our strategy." Gamelin identified the exact problem that would defeat France, but his warnings were ignored. The French government believed Belgium would hold. The French government believed Germany would not attack. The French government did not authorize the fortification of the gap. This is the smoking gun of French strategic failure, not obsolete doctrine, but ignored warnings about a critical vulnerability. Exhibit B, the speed versus response time analysis. German military records show the pace of advance. French military records show the pace of response. The gap is devastating. May 10, German invasion begins. May 12, German breakthrough at Sedan. May 13, French High Command realizes situation is critical. May 14, French decision to deploy reserves. May 15, first French counterattack ordered. May 16, first French counterattack launched. By May 16, German tanks had already moved 40 miles south from Sedan. French reserves were ordered to positions that were already behind German lines. The skeptics are right that reserves existed, but the skeptics ignore the fundamental problem. The reserves couldn't reach the right place in time. Exhibit C, the air combat evidence. The skeptics say France had comparable aircraft. The evidence shows something different. May 10th, France had 500 combat aircraft. May 12th, France had 800 combat aircraft. May 14th, France had 400 combat aircraft. May 16th, France had 200 combat aircraft. In 6 days, France lost 75% of its combat aircraft. Not through attrition in combat, but through destruction on the ground while parked at airfields. German Luftwaffe bombers specifically targeted French airfields. Within 48 hours, most French aircraft were destroyed. The skeptics are right that individual French aircraft were technically comparable, but the skeptics ignore that German air superiority meant French aircraft never got into the air. Without air cover, French ground forces were vulnerable to continuous Luftwaffe attack. This was a decisive factor that the skeptics minimize. Exhibit D, the command structure evidence. The skeptics say Gamelin made reasonable decisions, but the actual military records show something different. On May 12th, when the breakthrough occurred, the chain of command was 1. Field Commander detects breakthrough. 2. Reports to Divisional Commander. 3. Divisional Commander reports to Corps Commander. 4. Corps Commander reports to Army Group Commander. 5. Army Group Commander reports to General Staff in Paris. 6. General Staff in Paris reports to Gamelin. 7. Gamelin decides response. 8. Orders flow back through all levels. This process took a minimum of 6 hours. Meanwhile, German command structure was 1. Field Commander detects opportunity. 2. Makes decision locally. 3. Executes decision immediately. German decision-making took 30 minutes. The skeptics minimize this difference, but this difference was catastrophic. In 6 hours, German tanks moved 40 miles. By the time French orders were issued, the situation had changed fundamentally. A French officer's testimony, declassified after the war. We knew the situation was becoming critical. But by the time we received orders from Paris, those orders were already obsolete. We sent messages saying, German tanks are here, and by the time Paris responded, German tanks had moved there. The system was too slow for modern warfare. Exhibit E, the concentration of force evidence. The skeptics argue, France concentrated reserves where it could. But the German records show deliberate concentration of force at Sedan. At Sedan on May 12th, German forces, 1,200,000 soldiers, 1,600 guns, 500 tanks concentrated in 30-mile sector. French forces, 400,000 soldiers, 300 guns, 50 tanks defending 30-mile sector. This concentration was not accidental. This was deliberate strategy by German General Erich von Manstein. German strategy was, concentrate overwhelming force at the point of breakthrough. Breakthrough. Exploit the breakthrough before enemy can respond. This is what happened exactly as planned. Exhibit F, the Belgian collapse evidence. The skeptics claim Belgium's rapid fall was not France's fault. But the evidence shows France had intelligence that Belgium would fall quickly. A French military intelligence report, declassified. Belgium has only 22 divisions with limited equipment. In the event of German invasion, Belgium cannot hold for more than 4 to 5 days. We must assume Belgium will fall rapidly and plan accordingly. France knew Belgium could not hold. Yet France did not fully fortify the gap. France did not position reserves to respond to rapid Belgian collapse. France planned as if Belgium would hold much longer than intelligence suggested. This was a critical failure of French strategic planning. Not because Belgium fell, but because France was not prepared for Belgium falling as quickly as intelligence predicted. Exhibit G, the Gamelin paralysis evidence. The skeptics defend Gamelin as making reasonable decisions. But Gamelin's own record shows something different. May 13, 1940, 3 p.m. Gamelin wrote, "The situation is serious. We have been broken through at Sedan, but I do not yet have clear picture of situation. I will wait for more information before committing reserves." May 14, 1940, 9 a.m. Gamelin wrote, "The situation is becoming critical, but the information from field is confused. I still do not know exactly where German forces are. I will wait." May 15, 1940, 6 p.m. Gamelin wrote, "It is now clear that we have lost the war. The German breakthrough cannot be contained. The game is up." Gamelin was not cautious. He was paralyzed. Paralyzed by incomplete information, inability to respond to speed, realization that his strategic assumptions were wrong, incompatibility of his decision-making process with the pace of modern warfare. This is the smoking gun of French military leadership failure. Not strategic incompetence, but decision-making paralysis in the face of unprecedented speed. Exhibit H, the Doctrine evidence. The skeptics argue French doctrine was appropriate for defense. But German doctrine was specifically designed to break through defensive positions rapidly. German doctrine stated, "The goal of breakthrough is to create such speed of penetration that enemy command structure cannot respond. By the time enemy makes decision, situation has changed. Exploit the gap before enemy can consolidate." This doctrine was revolutionary, and it was specifically designed to defeat exactly the kind of defense France was preparing for. The skeptics are right that French doctrine was not obsolete for defending France. But the smoking gun is that German doctrine was specifically designed to defeat exactly the kind of defense France was preparing for. Exhibit I, the testimonies of German commanders. After the war, German generals were interviewed about the campaign. General Heinz Guderian, Panzer commander, "The French were not inferior soldiers. The French were not inferior in courage. But we had something new, Blitzkrieg. We had learned that speed was the key. By moving faster than the enemy could respond to, we could break their defensive positions. The Maginot Line was irrelevant because we did not attack it. We went around it. Speed made the line irrelevant." General Erich von Manstein, strategy. "The key was concentration of force at Sedan. We calculated that we could break through there before France could respond. And we were right. We broke through on May 12th. The French could not respond until May 14th. By then we were already 40 miles south. The game was over." These are not accounts of German superiority in doctrine or technology. These are accounts of German innovation in speed and operational tempo. The verdict: the skeptics offered nuance and complexity. That nuance is valuable. But the evidence shows the conventional narrative was substantially correct. Germany did not win because French doctrine was obsolete. Germany won because 1. German strategy was specifically designed to penetrate French defense through speed 2. German commanders had operational flexibility that French commanders lacked. 3. German forces concentrated at the decisive point where France was weak. 4. German speed exceeded French decision-making capability. 5. German air superiority prevented French response. 6. The speed of collapse was unprecedented, leaving no time for reserves to respond. This is not about French inferiority. This is about German innovation in a new form of warfare. This is about the collision of old military thinking with new military thinking. And the new thinking won. If the fall of France was caused by German innovation in Blitzkrieg, if the fall of France was caused by the incompatibility of defensive doctrine with offensive speed, if the fall of France was caused by command structure that couldn't respond to rapid change, what does that mean for military strategy? What does that mean for how nations defend themselves? What does that mean for the future of warfare? Implication number 1. Doctrine can become a prison. The French believed in fortified defense. This belief served France well in World War I. But this same belief became a prison in World War II. Once a military commits to a doctrine, once a military invests billions in fortifications based on that doctrine, once a military educates officers to think within that doctrine, the military becomes trapped. The Maginot Line was a masterpiece of defensive engineering, but it trapped French strategic thinking. France believed, if we build a defensive line, we are safe. This belief prevented France from developing alternatives. This belief prevented France from preparing for breakthrough. This belief prevented France from developing mobile reserves. The implication: military doctrines must be flexible. Doctrines must evolve. Nations that become too committed to a single doctrine become vulnerable to enemies that innovate. Implication number 2. Speed is a weapon. Germany won not because of better tanks. Germany won not because of better soldiers. Germany won because of speed. Speed had multiple implications. 1. Speed in tactics, tanks moving 40 miles per day. 2. Speed in operations, breakthrough exploited before response. 3. Speed in decision-making, German commanders deciding in 30 minutes, French in 6 hours. 4. Speed in innovation, Germany developed new doctrine before France could adapt. Modern warfare is even faster. Modern missiles travel at supersonic speeds. Modern cyber attacks happen at the speed of light. Modern disinformation spreads globally in minutes. The implication: speed is not just a tactical advantage, speed is strategic. Nations that can make decisions faster will prevail over nations that are slower. This is even more true in modern warfare than in 1940. Implication: 3. Bureaucracy kills military effectiveness. The French command structure had many layers. Decisions took 6 hours to flow through the hierarchy. The German command structure was flatter. Decisions took 30 minutes. This difference was not trivial. It was decisive. Modern militaries face similar challenges. How do you maintain command and control? How do you coordinate large organizations? But how do you do this without creating bureaucratic delay? The implication: organizational structure is not just administrative. Organizational structure is strategically important. Militaries that can flatten their command structures and empower local decision-making will have advantages over militaries that maintain rigid hierarchies. Implication number 4. Defensive doctrine is inherently vulnerable. The French invested billions in defensive fortifications. The German investment in offensive capability was less expensive. Yet the offensive capability won. This suggests something disturbing about military strategy. Defensive doctrines may be fundamentally vulnerable to offensive innovation. A defender must defend everywhere. An attacker only needs to attack one place. A defender must respond to attacks after they occur. An attacker chooses when and where to attack. This is why the Maginot Line failed. The Maginot Line defended everywhere except where Germany attacked. France couldn't defend everywhere. No nation can. The implication: nations cannot win wars through defense alone. Defense may buy time, defense may slow an attacker, but ultimately, the nation that can conduct offensive operations with greater speed and innovation will prevail. Implication number 5. Innovation trumps resources. France had more soldiers. France had more tanks. France had comparable aircraft. France had massive fortifications. Yet Germany won with innovation. Germany could not match France's resources. So Germany innovated. Germany developed Blitzkrieg. Germany developed a new way to fight that France was unprepared for. This has implications for modern conflict. A technologically advanced nation can be defeated by a nation that innovates asymmetric strategies. A larger military can be defeated by a military that fights in unexpected ways. The implication: in modern conflicts, innovation may matter more than resources. The ability to think differently, to fight differently, to adapt to changing circumstances may be more important than having more weapons or more soldiers. Implication number 6: intelligence alone cannot stop defeat. France had intelligence that Germany would attack. France had intelligence that the gap in the Maginot Line was vulnerable. France had intelligence that Belgium would fall quickly. But intelligence alone did not save France. Knowing something will happen is different from being able to stop it. France knew about the vulnerability, but France couldn't respond in time. Modern nations have extraordinary intelligence capabilities, but intelligence is worthless if the military cannot respond fast enough. The implication: intelligence is necessary but not sufficient. Intelligence must be coupled with the capability to respond quickly. Nations that have good intelligence but slow response times will still lose wars. Implication number 7: geography is not destiny. The skeptics argued France had geographical advantages, fortified borders, natural barriers. But geography did not prevent German victory. Geography matters less than doctrine, speed, and innovation. A good defensive position can be outmaneuvered. A strong fortification can be bypassed. Modern examples confirm this. In the 2003 Iraq War, American forces moved through difficult terrain at unprecedented speed, bypassing defensive positions. In the 2008 Georgia-Russia War, rapid Russian advances bypassed Georgian defensive lines. The implication: geography matters, but it matters less than nations think. Defensive fortifications can be bypassed. Terrain can be overcome. Speed and innovation can defeat geographical advantages. Implication number 8: the cost of unpreparedness is catastrophic. France's unpreparedness for Blitzkrieg cost 1.9 million soldiers captured, 360,000 soldiers killed or wounded, entire nation occupied for 4 years, infrastructure destroyed, economy devastated, all of this from 6 weeks of military defeat. In modern warfare, the costs would be even greater. A nuclear power unprepared for modern conflict could face civilization-ending consequences. The implication: military preparedness is existential. Nations cannot afford to be unprepared for new forms of warfare. The cost of unpreparedness is not just military defeat, it is national catastrophe. Implication number 9: institutional inertia is a killer. The French military was trapped by its own institutional history. The Maginot Line represented decades of French military thinking. The defense doctrine represented generations of French military tradition. To abandon this doctrine was to question the entire institutional basis of the French military. This institutional inertia meant France could not adapt. Even when intelligence warned of vulnerability, even when the breakthrough occurred, the institutional momentum kept France committed to a strategy that was failing. Modern institutions face similar challenges. Large organizations develop institutional cultures. These cultures become resistant to change. The implication: institutional change is difficult. But institutional inertia is deadly in fast-changing environments. Organizations that cannot overcome their own institutional inertia will lose to competitors that can change faster. Implication: Year 10. The next war is usually different from the last war. The French military was prepared to fight World War I again. The German military was prepared to fight a different kind of war entirely. This is always the tragedy of military planning. The most likely mistake a military can make is preparing to fight the last war instead of the next war. The implication: military institutions must constantly question their assumptions. Military institutions must constantly prepare for new forms of warfare. The military that assumes the next war will be like the last war will lose. 84 years have passed since the German breakthrough at Sedan. The tanks are gone. The soldiers are gone. Most of them are dead. The fall of France happened in 6 weeks. 6 weeks to destroy. 20 years of military planning. Billions of francs invested in fortifications. Generations of military tradition. The most powerful military on continental Europe. The confidence that France was safe. And here is what is most important to understand. France did not lose because France was weak. France did not lose because French soldiers were cowardly. France did not lose because French strategy was absurd. France lost because Germany innovated. Germany developed a new form of warfare. Germany executed that new form of warfare with precision and speed. And France, committed to old forms of warfare, could not respond. This is the tragedy of the fall of France. It was not inevitable. It was not due to French inferiority. It was due to a collision of two different ways of thinking about warfare. And the new way of thinking won. The final truth about the fall of France: institutions that cannot adapt die. The French military could not adapt. The French government could not adapt. French society could not adapt to what was happening. By the time France realized what was happening, it was too late. The lessons for today, 84 years later, the fall of France, remains relevant. In fact, it becomes more relevant as the pace of change accelerates. We see the same pattern repeating. Kodak dominated photography, but couldn't adapt to digital cameras. Blockbuster dominated video rental, but couldn't adapt to streaming. Traditional news media couldn't adapt to digital news. And in military and strategic terms, the nations that can innovate fastest will prevail. The militaries that can make decisions fastest will prevail. The governments that can adapt fastest will prevail. The warning. The fall of France warns us. Do not become so committed to your existing way of doing things that you cannot change. Do not become so invested in your past success that you cannot adapt to new challenges. Do not become so trapped in your institutional inertia that you cannot innovate. Because if you do, you will fall like France fell. Not because you are weak, but because you are rigid. The final message. The soldiers who fought in the fall of France deserve to be remembered, not as failures, but as humans caught in a system that could not adapt. 1.9 million of them were captured. 360,000 were killed or wounded. Millions more were displaced. An entire nation was occupied. They fought with courage. They fought with skill. They fought with determination, but they fought in a system that could not adapt. And that system's failure became their tragedy. The eternal question. When the fall of France occurred, people asked, how could this happen? How could the most powerful military on continental Europe be defeated in 6 weeks? The answer is that institutions that cannot adapt will fall, and that is a lesson that remains true today. Perhaps it is more true today than in 1940, because the pace of change is faster, because the stakes are higher, because the potential consequences of institutional failure are greater. The legacy. The fall of France is not just history. It is a mirror held up to the present. It is a warning about what happens when institutions fail to adapt. It is a test case for a principle that remains eternally relevant. The institution that can adapt fastest survives. The institution that cannot adapt falls. The soldiers of 1940 France did not lose because they were inferior. They lost because their institution was inflexible. And in our modern world, as we face challenges we have never faced before, as technology changes faster than ever, as competition accelerates beyond precedent, the lesson of the fall of France becomes more important, not less. The nations and institutions that adapt will survive. The nations and institutions that cannot adapt will fall. Not through any fault of their people, not through any lack of courage, not through any lack of skill, but simply because they could not change fast enough to meet the challenge. This is the lesson of the fall of France. This is why we remember. Not to blame, but to learn. Not to judge, but to understand. Not to dwell on the past, but to prepare for the future. Because if we don't learn this lesson, we are condemned to repeat it. And the cost of repeating it could be far greater than it was in 1940. The fall of France. The tragedy of institutional inertia. The victory of innovation and speed. The eternal warning, adapt or die. The soldiers of 1940. France did not lose because they were inferior. They lost because their institution was inflexible. And in our modern world, as we face challenges we have never faced before, as technology changes faster than ever, as competition accelerates beyond precedent, the lesson of the fall of France becomes more important, not less. The nations and institutions that adapt will survive. The nations and institutions that cannot adapt will fall, not through any fault of their people, not through any lack of courage, not through any lack of skill, but simply because they could not change fast enough to meet the challenge.